Hi, welcome to Lab 1. I will make one of these for each week. Um, the lab window itself might look a little bit different. If you don't know where I am, right, let me go back to modules, week 2. Whoops, got ahead of myself. There we go. This is the lab. This lab report file here is the same one that's embedded on the lab. So if you open the lab itself, um, this link down here takes you to the same lab report. I just didn't want people to miss it, so I put it in two places. So this is what this week's lab looks like. They might each look a little different depending on how I'm going to try and present things. I'm making it up as I go. There's no textbook for this, so we'll see how things work. You will have a lab guide each week. If you haven't clicked on this yet, what it is a link to a file in Dropbox. If you haven't used Dropbox before, you don't necessarily, I don't think you need an account to access the file, but it does help. And then, oh, sorry, it just took a second to load. So if when you first open it up, you don't have three little dots here, you might have to hit this here to open the sidebar. I think what that does is close it. Oh, but the dots are still there. Good. So just look for those three dots, and then you're going to hit download, and then you'll open it with Word, and you'll have it to work with. I already have it open on my computer, so I'm just going to open the Word file, and we're going to make it a little bigger. There we go. So the first thing you want to do on every lab is note the learning objectives. These are important. These tell you what you need to be able to do or what you're going to need to know for each lab. Most of them do have activities in the lab itself or in my lab report that reinforce this material, but they don't all do because some of it I didn't think lent itself well to a lab report, and I don't want to create too much busy work where you're just, filling out lab reports and you feel like you're in junior high or something. So let me just read through the objectives. Describe the anatomical position. We'll talk about that. Directional and regional terms, using the anatomical terms. Identify and locate different organs. So you are going to be locating organs. And then you are going to have to, the follow-up question to what organ is this will be what organ system does it belong in, but I am not going to ask you the function of each organ system. And then we are going to do the body cavities and the abdominal pelvic regions. I like to run through these because occasionally there's objectives that I just don't cover. So first up, the anatomical position. You can read about it here. I'm going to show it to you here. So this gentleman right here that is facing us, he is in the anatomical position. So whenever we talk about where something is located on a body, it's always in reference to a person standing in that position, head forward, feet about shoulder width apart, arms at the side, and then the most important part, palms facing forward. This now specifies what is the front or ventral surface of your arm and what is the back or dorsal surface of your arm. So now if you're sunbathing, you know which way to turn your arms so that you're tanning your front and your back at the same time. See, this is applicable to your real life. In all seriousness, though, you do want to remember that this is the anatomical position, especially in regards to the arms. Because also, in addition to defining what's the front and the back of the arm, it also defines what's the inside or medial surface of the arm or outside or lateral surface of the arm. And there may be quiz or exam questions about, the proper description of the anatomical position. Then we have regional terms. What these are actual locations. So this is not like north, south, east, and west. This is like Georgia, North Carolina, North Dakota, California, San Diego. These are discrete places on your body that have these special names. So what you need to do is go through this list here and learn all of the anterior and posterior body landmarks, or what we sometimes call regional terms, and then use these figures to fill out this table here and this table here. That you will be doing in your lab report. You don't have to fill out the lab guide. It is there, as it says, as your guide. So I'm not going to go through all of these. You can learn them all in the table. I'm going to do two things. One, I'm going to show you what you should do for your lab report. And let me do that first, because that's the fun part. So you've got a skeleton. You are going to take your skeleton. You should probably name it. This is Fred. Don't ask me why Fred. And you can see I've put a few labels on Fred's head. So Fred says this is his frontal region, this is his nasal region. Whoops. And this is his oral region. This is one of the things you're going to be doing with your skeleton from your lab kit. And what I would recommend is to, so you're going to label that guy up and you're going to take pictures of all of the labels and then put those in the lab report, and I'll show you that later. I would just recommend writing big enough so that they're easy for me to read, and then taking the minimum number of pictures possible to show the maximum number of labels. If you cannot get every single label in the field of view readable with fewer than 5 or 8 pictures, that's fine. I don't need you to take and submit 25 pictures because those are going to be huge files. So that's what you're going to do for your lab report here, and I'll show you the lab report in a minute. But let's run through what you need to learn. So these, as they say here, are anterior body landmarks. The only thing I'm going to do is point out any ones that need a little bit of explanation or that actually extend around to the posterior. So let me just look. Nasal, oral, cervical. That refers to the neck. That is both anterior and posterior. So front, back, side, wherever it is on your neck, it's all part of your cervical region. Axillary, frontal, orbital, buccal, or busal, those are all fine. Abdominal. Again, so there are going to be times, if we're looking at this here, like there's abdominal, there's umbilical, and there's pelvic. So these are all parts of your torso. On a quiz or an exam, you should always use the most specific term possible. Right? So if the pointer is pointing right at the belly button, abdominal is correct, but umbilical is better. So be aware of that. I'm usually forgiving on quizzes and then not so forgiving on exams. And the rest of those are all self-explanatory. So these all anterior body landmarks, which is front of the body. More anterior body landmarks. Again, when you're looking at sternal, thoracic, mammary, that's different regions of your chest. Be specific. And then coxal, pubic that's labeled, right? Oh wait, they have pubic down here. We'll leave that at that. There can be some confusion sometimes because pubic comes up in a different set of terms and it's used for a slightly different part of the body. But we'll leave that at that. And then posterior body landmarks. First one, just to explain, cephalic, that is the head, and it's the whole head. So front, back, left, right, doesn't matter. Cephalic region is your entire noggin there. Odic, sacral, occipital, vertebral, scapular. Again, right on the back. Dorsal, vertebral, scapular are all different parts of your back. Be as specific as possible. Right? Dorsal refers to the whole backside of your body, but vertebral is more specific to the region of your body superficial to your vertebral column. So again, always be as specific as possible. Gluteal, calcaneal, plantar, acromial, and popliteal. Acromial is a little tricky because it's not necessarily the back of your shoulder, it's your whole shoulder. So if you had like a small shoulder pad, here it looks better on this side, right? It's really everything that your deltoid here covers. So it's the front of your shoulder, the side of your shoulder, top and back. Or you could just say shoulder. And then all the other ones are definitively on the posterior region. There's one other I think I forgot here. Sorry, I'm skipping around. Brachial. That is also 360 degrees around this region of your arm. So these muscles right here, your biceps, are called biceps brachii because it's a two-headed muscle in the brachial region of your body. Down here, triceps brachii, three-headed muscle, also in the brachial region of your body. So that's all the way around your upper arm is all brachial region. And then all the other ones again are straightforward. Then we get to these terms here. These are directional terms, or terms that we use to compare where something is located relative to something else. So these are like north, south, east, and west. If you say something is located north, people are going to look at you weird because they're going to want to know north of where, right? Florida is north of Cuba, but it's south of Delaware. And so that's the way these terms are always used, is to refer where something is relative to something else. Now, anterior and posterior, we've already seen before, used to just describe the whole front and the whole back of the body, but they can also be directional. So if something is in front of something else, like your sternum is in front of your heart, you would say that the sternum is anterior to the heart. You would say that the heart is posterior to the sternum. But remember, this is all relative, right? Your heart sits in front of your vertebral column, so you could say that your heart is anterior to your vertebral column, which would then be posterior to the heart. As we go through these, there are going to be, or I should say, on quizzes and exams, there may be instances where there's more than one possible correct answer. I will accept all possible correct answers, so don't drive yourself crazy if you think, oh my God, there's more than one correct answer, and which one is Dr. I going to accept? He's a relatively reasonable dude. He will accept most reasonable answers. All right, so that's anterior, posterior. Superior and inferior refers to whether something is located above or below something else on the body. It's usually used on the torso, but you can use it on the legs. We are going to see later that its proximal and distal are more preferable for arms and legs, because no matter what position you move your arms and legs in, those terms are still going to apply. So superior just means above. Your head is superior to your shoulders, or your cephalic region is superior to your cervical region. Your cervical region is superior to your thoracic region. Your thoracic region is inferior to your cervical region, right? But superior to your abdominal region. So get used to using all of those. And you could say, perhaps on the leg, that your knee is superior to your ankle, or your elbow is superior to your wrist, because in the anatomical position, that is how those items are arranged. Lateral and medial are used to describe where something is located on your midline. maybe I'll get out Fred again. Can you all see Fred? Here's Fred. Oh, I got stuff on the front of Fred. Let's turn Fred to the back, right? So here's Fred's vertebral column. That's your point of reference for medial versus lateral. So if something is closer to the vertebral column than something else, you would say it is medial. So you would say that your scapular region is medial to your brachial region because the scapula is closer to your midline than your brachial region. Right? You would say your scapular region is lateral to your vertebral region because it's further away from the midline than your vertebral region. And again, this is where anatomical position becomes important. If we know which way our palms are supposed to be facing, then we know, and again, this is the back. Looking at the arm bones, your radius is going to be lateral to your ulna being medial to your radius. So that's an example of when anatomical position comes in handy. Let's keep Fred here for a second. What do we have next? Proximal and distal. Oh, this is a good one for Fred. Right, so this is usually used for limbs. If something is closer to the torso on a limb, either an arm or a leg, we say it is proximal. Right, so your knee is proximal to your ankle. Your elbow is proximal to your wrist. And the reason why we want to use proximal preferable to superior is that if you move your arm like that, your elbow is now no longer superior to your wrist, but it's still closer to your torso, so it's still proximal. Your wrist is still distal to your elbow is proximal to your wrist. Right, elbow distal to brachial region proximal to elbow, or olecranon process. So just get used to practicing all of that. There should be, I'm going to show you where you can do some practice too that might help. And then superficial versus deep, Fred is not going to help us with because he's only got one tissue. He's all bone. But superficial versus deep, now you need to start thinking like a surgeon. So those things that are closer to the surface of the body are referred to as superficial. If they're deeper down, they're called deep. It's usually easiest to think about if you're moving through tissue layers on a limb, right? You would say your skin is superficial to your muscles are superficial to your bone. So your bone would then be deep to your muscles, and your muscles would be deep to your skin. It gets a little tricky when you're talking about your torso, right? If you're lying face up on the operating table, then your heart is deep to your sternum, but also, what's the word I'm looking for? Ventral to your sternum. If you're face down and you're cutting through somebody, you're going to get to the heart through the back before you get to the sternum. So superficial deep gets a little tricky when we're talking about where things are located in the torso, but you can still use it, and I think if I'm grading those questions, I'm thinking the person is either in the anatomical position or lying face up, because that's how most of us do surgery. Unless you have surgery on your kidneys, then apparently they put you on your stomach and in all sorts of weird positions so they can get to your kidney. TMI, I just know this because my father had some work done on his kidneys. Let's see. Oh, and so these are the terms, which I forgot to show you the terms because I'm out of practice with these screencasts. So let's see what's next. You scroll, I'll drink. Body planes. These are straightforward. You have a sagittal, frontal, and transverse plane. I do not care that you know mid-sagittal, median, or parasagittal. So sagittal just means you're cutting something into, how do I face it, right? A left portion or a right portion. And it doesn't matter to me whether you go right down the middle or maybe you just lop somebody's shoulder off. That's still a sagittal section. You're cutting them into a left portion and a right portion. Frontal is like this. So you're going to have a front portion and a back portion, or an anterior portion and a posterior portion. And then transverse, again, is a top portion and a bottom portion. And it doesn't matter where the transverse plane is, right? You can decapitate somebody. That is a transverse plane through the cervical region. Or you can just chop them off at the knees. I think I've watched too much Game of Thrones, right? That would be a transverse section through the knees. So know this figure. It might come up on a quiz. And then on the exam, I think I might end up using the skeleton because you have the skeleton. Perhaps just with pieces of paper held up on the skeleton to denote, can't speak, these planes of section that are in the picture here. So that's that. So I have, this is why, where did it go? This picture is here. And when it loaded, it went in sideways. I tried to save it in the proper orientation. But you can just, right, you can just view it. Where do you do that? View image. And then, right, if you have the same stuff I have, you just click. There you go. So here is a previously intact kidney, which I have cut into a right portion and a left portion. So that's a sagittal section. Yes, my handwriting is crap. This, somebody has just chopped the bottom off. That is a transverse section. And here you are looking at what we are presuming is the back or posterior portion of a kidney. So that is a frontal section. So you might see pictures like the figure that we had with the planes of section, or it might be kidneys, or maybe it'll be an organ like the brain or the heart, and you'll have to tell me transverse, sagittal, or coronal section. Where did we go? So we did that. And this is one of those things that is not in your lab report because I didn't want to have you like try and draw a picture of a kidney and you don't have one to dissect, so you just want to commit that to memory. You can draw it here if you want to. The body cavities. There are two ways that you want to know the body cavities. One, you simply want to be able to identify them when you see them in the pictures. And then two, you want to know how they are arranged, meaning which smaller cavities belong in which larger cavities. So for instance, you want to know that the cranial and vertebral cavity are both part of the dorsal cavity, and that your ventral cavity is divided into an abdominal pelvic and a thoracic cavity, and then that thoracic cavity is further subdivided into mediastinum and pleura. You're not worried about lower versus superior mediastinum. And then your abdominal pelvic region is, I can't speak, divided into the abdominal region and the pelvic region. This really should be like sort of a dotted line or something. There is not a hard anatomical boundary in between abdominal and pelvic. In between your thoracic and your abdominal pelvic region is your diaphragm, so it is a very distinct, robust anatomical boundary or border. In your abdominal pelvic cavity, you just have a thin membrane that encloses all of your digestive organs, and that is what creates the border, or that is what signifies what's in your abdominal cavity versus your pelvic cavity, is basically a piece of saran wrap that wraps your abdominal organs and separates them from your bladder and other pelvic organs. So for this in your lab report, I don't know if you all can see on Fred here, because the lighting in this room is not great. I have pieces of paper on Fred, and I have labeled Fred's abdominal cavity, pelvic cavity, mediastinum, and pleura. You're going to do the same thing, take pictures, plop them into your lab report, and submit that. I do have example photos in your lab report, so it should be pretty straightforward what you're doing. Let's see. Yeah, so these are the cavities that you need to know, as well as the abdominal pelvic regions, which is here. And this is where I should point out, and I probably should have pointed out earlier, whenever we are looking at pictures of people or anatomical figures, we're assuming 1, the person is in the anatomical position, and 2, the person is facing you. So if somebody is facing you, whoops, their right is on your left, their left is on your right. So make sure you keep that straight and then be able to apply these 9 terms to the tic-tac-toe grid should you see a blank one on a quiz or an exam. Don't worry about the quadrants. It's not on your list of things to know, and I never ask about it. I will point out just a few things about this because I like to explain where some of the terminology comes from and point out places where it's actually systematic and makes sense. So hypo here, left and right hypochondriac region, means below, and CHON refers to cartilage. This stuff up here, these portions of the ribs, those are made out of cartilage. It's called costal cartilage. There's also cartilage down here, but so this is called, if you read it, the below the cartilage region, and it is below some cartilage here. Epi means on top of. Gastric refers to your stomach, so superficial to your stomach is your epigastric region. Umbilical is easy enough because that's where your umbilicus is, or belly button. Right and left lumbar regions, I don't know why they're called lumbar, and it's also the same for your back. That shows up in 2 places. Right and left iliac. Those I don't have an explanation for, but we're going to keep them. There's another term that shows up in other books sometimes for that region called inguinal, but I prefer inguinal for a different part of the body. It is also, it's really usually when people say inguinal, they mean the crease of your groin, and up here a little bit. And then hypogastric, now we are well below the gastric region, so that kind of makes sense. Organ systems overview. So for this, I don't know if my lab, let me just show you the lab report and I'll tell you what you really should do. Well, no, there's a couple things to do here. You want to be able to identify any of these organs should you see them again. Generally what we use for this on the lab exam is the torso, but it could be any model. And I'm going to take this opportunity to point out to you how to find a whole bunch of stuff for lab called Practice Anatomy Lab. No, I'm not. I'm going to make a separate video for that because we're already at 28 minutes and you're probably getting tired of this. So I'll show you where that is, but I'll make a separate video. So yeah, don't worry about this. I just want you to be able to identify the organ if you see it and then be able to state that organ's function. No, excuse me. I take it back. I screwed up. Identify the organ if you see it and then say what organ system that organ is in. So these 2 things right there. But we don't have to know the whole body yet and all the organ systems. This was put in here presumably to help you practice with superior, inferior, medial, but it's never been clear to me how you're supposed to fill it out. So if you don't want to fill it out, that's fine, because I don't know what to do with it either. So that's the overview of the things you need to know. It's really not that bad. It's a lot of terms, but nothing mind-blowingly hard conceptually speaking. So then what you need to do is your lab report, and the link to that is here. There we go, here. And I do include here, please remember there are things that are not in your lab report that you still need to know for the exam. So study your entire lab guide. Your lab report is just there to reinforce certain things. And it contains the things that I could think of physical activities for you to do. So you have a blank lab report here, which I will open, and then really what I should have done was opened the example one, because that makes more sense. There's your example. Whoops, being a little slow, enable editing. Yeah, here's the example. So here's your regional terms, anterior and posterior landmarks. You're just going to fill in nose, mouth, neck, armpit. Frontal is forehead, orbital is around the eye. So fill in this table, fill in that table, and then, right, label your skeleton, take pictures, submit as many pictures as it takes to get most of your, what are those called, labels visible. Mine is a little sloppy, but I already know all this stuff, so I don't have to be careful about it. You should perhaps do a slightly better job than I did here. I'm not going to have you take pictures for the planes of the body, but just write down whether they do left, right, front, back, or top, bottom portions of the body for how they divide things up. For activity 4, you probably really just need 2 pictures. Here is what I have done on the front, showing the the ventral body cavity, and then its abdominal, thoracic, and the subdivisions, right? Abdominal, pelvic, mediastinum, pleura. So 1 picture for the ventral body cavity, and then if you turn your skeleton around, you can do cranial and vertebral on the head and the vertebral cavity, and submit those. So it really should just be 2 pictures, 1 for the ventral body cavity and 1 for the dorsal body cavity. Submit those. Do make sure that your identifier gets in one of the pictures. I neglected to do that because I was in a hurry today, but pick something that not everybody would have, like, where's my identifier that I usually use? Oh, I can't find it. Here it is. Here's my, right, my little pen that looks like a leg. There's, how do you do that? Like that. There we go. That's the knee, and then your tibia and your fibula there, and then you're right with that part. So something small that you can put in the picture that not everybody's going to have, and just make sure it gets in one of the pictures. And then if the background is the same on all of your photos, I'm going to know you took them all in the same room. Then I just have some images of the torsos that I found that you can practice labeling with. So you'll just scroll through and down here. A, the white and blue thing. I'm not going to tell you what that is because that one's tricky. B, you would just go, oh, that's a lung. And C, you would go, oh, whoops, that's the heart. And again, I did put a few clues in there. So identify all of those. Those are all of the organs. These are your 9 abdominal pelvic regions. A through I think I made that correct. So you just fill this out. You drop in a couple of pictures, you fill out all of the tables, you do your identification, and then save it either as a Word file or as a PDF file. I think some students sometimes save like cloud files, like a Google Doc or something like that, and it doesn't work very well. You can try it. I think what's the word I'm looking for? I think I indicated that your submission can be a URL. I don't know if a URL is going to work for a cloud storage document, but go ahead, give it a try. And I think that's it. It really ought not take too long, but you just submit your lab report. That's 5 points. And then next week, depending on the section, we have some Monday, some Wednesday. Oh, excuse me, this is for the asynchronous class. I'm going to get so confused all semester trying to figure out whether I'm working on synchronous versus asynchronous. But I think that's it. Let me know if you have questions. And I will be around to answer them. Peace out. 35 minutes.